I think someone saw those Egyptian cop videos and got a little too excited. It would appear that the American military is about to be way more masculine than ever, at least in the hormonal department, because beards are still off the table. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth just released a video and policy stating that service members over the age of 30 will be getting mandatory yearly testosterone screens in order to see if they're within those optimal ranges, while those under 30 have the option to get them as well, and all age groups will be offered free TRT hormone therapy to get those numbers back up. So is every trooper from Navy SEAL to desk clerk about to look Olympia ready for a war with China? Or is this a nothing burger with an outrageous headline attached? Well, potential increase in domestic violence occurrences, the like and subscribe button, and let's talk about it. So the military is worried that troops have hormone levels that are out of whack. That statement, in and of itself, is not an uncontroversial thing to have in the back of your head. Between constant sleep deprivation, exposure to not-so-great chemicals 24/7, physical wear and tear that rips out cartilage faster than a surgeon could dream of, and enough daily stress to give the Dalai Lama night terrors, all of those things are going to make the human body get a little out of whack. There is a reason I couldn't stand or walk for more than 10 minutes without pain before I turned 20. Now that I'm 30, that number is down to 5 minutes. Also, drinking alcohol and having a diet that looks like what a 10-year-old would ask for their last meal and doesn't contain a single vegetable also lowers testosterone, but I don't know if people are ready for that conversation. There have been numerous studies done over and over the years that show things like Ranger School graduates having significantly low testosterone levels following their training. And same for special operations folks after deployments or long periods of time with high op tempos. This is also coming around as the military is revamping how it tests body fat percentages in soldiers to a stricter system that had many who passed the old test just fine now being labeled as too fat to be in uniform. Now, wanting to make sure that your troops don't have weird hormone problems or carry too much body fat are not bad things at all in general. As much as I liked asking overweight soldiers, "What'd you have for lunch?" Everything, I would have preferred that an opportunity to make those jokes wasn't there by not having fat soldiers in the first place. Testosterone is naturally something required for both men and women to not only have optimal physical performance, but just normal bodily functions in general. So there is more than enough scientific evidence to back this kind of idea up. But like anything I talk about on this channel, it's not as simple as just getting dudes on TRT so they can do 5 more push-ups than they could before. Now, before I get into the more sciencey side of things, I want to talk about how this looks from just a pure military perspective and how it might cause some issues. First, it's important to keep in mind that once you get on TRT, a lot of the times it's for life. Once you introduce a lot of hormone therapies, it's a bit of a lifelong sentence, and getting off of it is not easy and will more than likely land you in an even worse state of health than before you started. The best case scenario is that you go back to your lower numbers prior to TRT. Anytime you have a service member start any kind of medical anything, you have to think about it in the worst case scenario. What happens if they have to suddenly stop it with no access to medical facilities while in a long duration combat environment? Most TRT therapies require a person to get their injections or whatever 2 to 4 times a month, though many studies are showing that doing it even more frequently is preferred and helps with hormone stability. That is perfectly fine if you are in a garrison environment where most of the time is spent sitting around or just training on your base. And even sending a guy off to run to the doctor for a couple hours in the middle of a larger or longer training exercise isn't the biggest deal in the world. The problem is when you get into actual real world fighting, which is, the actual time and place, having better health would actually pay off for your military. Talk to any service member of any branch of any military of any country ever, and they will tell you stories of supplies not showing up late, or at the very least, missing something important in general. Not having access to your hormone therapy because the supply truck couldn't get to your specific dug-in fighting position in the middle of the woods is going to spell disaster for anyone actively on the therapy. And this isn't just an issue with TRT. The DoD/DOW has put a lot of thought into this in the past because even if a medication or treatment can bring someone up to a full war-fighting status, it's going to cause more harm than good if they can't operate without it. Every single medical anything from ibuprofen to literal Colombian bang bang has to pass the military's basic deployability test. First is that ideally the trooper should be able to carry a 3 to 6 month supply of it on themselves. Yes, that's going to be a lot of pills shaking around in your rucksack, but it's better than having to constantly deliver normal doses back and forth for months in a combat scenario. Second, they generally cannot require refrigeration, electricity, or what's called a cold chain, which is basically all the ways you're cooling down medications from start to finish that are going to ensure it eventually gets to the soldier without becoming too warm at some point in transit. On top of that, it has to be able to tolerate heat, cold, and sunlight, because storing in a cool and dark place ain't exactly a luxury you can afford in the middle of a war zone. Next, it has to be able to be taken if the person is experiencing some level of dehydration. Not enough that the dehydration itself is causing medical issues, but in scenarios where the soldier or Marine is sweating more than he's taken in because the jungle or desert is doing its thing, the medication still has to be able to work normally. And lastly, it cannot require what the DoD refers to as an evacuation, meaning you can't constantly be pulling someone from a combat zone so he or she can get blood work or monitoring done. And the ultimate thing to actually pass everything on top of those questions is to ask if the soldier would still be able to perform without that medication. Yes, their performance would probably be degraded, but it wouldn't be catastrophic to their health, which would have snowball effects on everyone else around them. Now, troops are often given things that break these rules, but are usually labeled as non-deployable, meaning, yes, they can train and help their unit stateside, but they can't go with them when everyone loads up on a plane to go overseas. And let me tell you, they are strict about that one. Even troops that would only be sent on rotations to places like Eastern Europe or South Korea are not allowed to be on those treatments, even if the permanently stationed troops there just a few miles next door are non-deployable themselves and on the exact same medication. Now, hormone therapy kind of sits on a middle ground of breaking those rules and not breaking those rules. Test does not need to be refrigerated, and a soldier will not instantly die if his weekly blood work or the therapy was interrupted for a few weeks. As it stands, troops on any kind of hormone therapy aren't automatically kept from deploying. It's a case-by-case basis, and it depends a lot on the specific therapy, where they're going, and what they'll be doing when they get there. If an Air Force colonel is doing a rotation to Germany, and his job requires him to be permanently planted at a desk, him being on light hormonal therapy because he's in his early 50s ain't a big deal. If a 20-year-old private is in total pituitary shutdown and is about to be sent in to serve as human drone detector for 9 months in a country you've never even heard of, odds are he's not going to be allowed to go. That said, injecting yourself in a foxhole after you haven't showered in weeks ain't exactly best practice. Managing used needles is going to be weird and definitely lead to unintentional pokes here and there. And walking around with your assault pack full of tea vials is going to make your patrol sound like a group of high schoolers walking to a party. Now, there are other ways of doing TRT like gels and patches, and that would solve the problem of actually administering it, but nothing will actually solve the problem of making sure a soldier has access to it in the first place. Logistics in the 2020s has proven to be pretty damn hard. Keeping troops supplied with the bare minimum to fight, like water and ammo, is, like everything else, falling prey to the drone menace. But even in times when the US had essentially total dominance over land and air like Iraq and Afghanistan, troops often still went weeks without supplies and months without relief. Another thing to consider is that unlike Iraq and Afghanistan, where service members operated out of large posts or at the very least forward operating bases in the middle of nowhere, they were still able to store large amounts of supplies that could last long amounts of time before needing to get more. The US is expecting that in the next fight, that kind of thing will be left in the past a good bit. Units will have to operate more dispersed for longer periods of time and not stay in any one location a minute longer than they need to. The closest thing they're going to get to a forward operating base is the shallow grave that they dug for themselves to sleep in that night. That, obviously constrains things. And while we like to brag about stuff like the ice cream boat from World War II or containerized Burger Kings we send into combat, for every one of those stories, there are 1,000 more from troops not getting what they needed and when. Now, the elephant in the room is obviously the fact that if you happen to be born with chronic blurred face syndrome, you somehow still look like a professional bodybuilder at the end of a 6-month combat deployment. It's not really a secret that the special boys love their juice while overseas. But before you click off on this video to go watch another episode of your favorite podcast, Navy SEALs Lying to You, some things to consider. First is that when you get to a certain level, the rules change a good bit, and performance-enhancing substances are going to be floating around, if not actively pushed onto those operators. The level of physical performance expected of them is often beyond what is actually possible for humans to do without some kind of secret sauce that includes a needle in your butt or a pill that keeps you awake for 2 days straight. That is to say, the risk-to-reward ratio is in favor of the PEDs. Those guys also almost exclusively operate out of some kind of operating base, and they don't do things like sitting in a trench for 6 months straight. The places they do operate from, regardless of how austere they are going to have better support and logistics than literally anyone else. So while yes, your favorite Delta Ranger sniper guy managed to get his HGH and blood work done in Afghanistan just fine, that does not mean it's something we can automatically or even realistically scale for everyone, especially when even supply drones have abysmal survival rates. Now again, a soldier not getting his TRT because the supply truck with all the T vials got FPV'd in the face, it's not a death sentence. We see examples of men with no testosterone walking among us daily and they seem to be doing just fine. But it's still going to cause issues if it goes on long enough. Basically, every metric of their physical and mental performance is going to tank. And the lack of sleep, physical exertion, and mental stress of a combat operation is going to make the whole problem even worse than it would have otherwise. Does that mean World War III is lost if Sergeant Joe doesn't get his weekly poke? No. Will it cause problems? Undoubtedly. But right now, we don't have any way of knowing how bad or what the totality of consequences would be. Now, that's kind of my military argument around this, but there are some things to keep in mind, both good and bad, if we want to look at this thing in its totality, so to speak. First to consider is that this is not the kind of TRT, quote, therapy that makes every Instagram operator and 50-year-old divorced insurance salesman look like they had blood pressure equal to that of a fire hydrant. Sequard specifically said this is about returning levels to where they should be naturally, not about physical enhancement. Now, there is room to argue that testosterone naturally goes down as you get older, but that's not what we're here to discuss. Actual TRT that's not just given out by some sketchy clinic hoping to rake in the big bucks from men who can't get it up anymore is a lot more conservative than people think. The goal, at least how it's been worded so far, is to combat the effects of lower testosterone due to the external causes, like inhaling tank fumes for years or surviving off of MREs for any amount of time. That would, in theory, give us a bunch of troops that are still going to be tired and irritable, but it's because they just experienced the forbidden sunshine and it's cold outside, not because their blood work's all funky. And even though this is in the news right now, it's like everywhere all over my feed, this is something the military has been toying with for a hot minute now. The government has been giving troops hormone therapy since World War II, though it was way less common and mostly for vets after they'd been injured and left the service already. Starting during the Vietnam era and going through the 90s, the DoD did tons of studies on everything that affects human performance. Stress, all hormones, not just testosterone, sleep deprivation, starvation, overtraining, undertraining, and what happens to a person physiologically before, during, and after combat rotations. Shocker, shocker, they found all those things are not healthy. Who'd have thought that one? But the answer wasn't, and this is where I have the biggest problem with all this, is just sending dudes off to get TRT. Are there situations that we aren't going to avoid troops having fluctuations of hormones? Yes. If World War III kicked off tomorrow, dudes pushing a 1,000 on the T number are still going to physically perform suboptimally after enough time. You cannot escape certain things. But it doesn't mean we can't do things like trying to get troops to not be as stressed when 99% of their service is going to be spent not doing combat, or trying to incentivize a better fitness standards, better sleep, or just eating healthier. I find it a bit funny and ironic that you get laughed at for asking for extra protein at lunch at the dining facility, but TRT is free and available if you want it. This kind of thing is what I think should be the absolute last step of trying to get a soldier, Marine, airman, whoever, healthy again. I'm definitely not against things like stricter fat requirements or higher fitness standards. And I'm not even saying testosterone therapy for troops as a broad concept is automatically bad. But giving a dude TRT when he also goes to the on-post Burger King every day, thinks the full sugar monster is a good replacement for water, and says things like BMI is stupid because it doesn't take into account muscle mass, ain't gonna actually solve anything. TRT on its own, even when totally legit and monitored by a doctor, will usually still cause health issues down the line, even if those health issues don't specifically kill you. That's fine if you're a special operator type and willing to trade increased physical performance now for a bit of longevity later, but for your average troops, it's gonna be like slamming coffee because you pulled an all-nighter playing video games. Sure, you're a bit lively for a few hours, and then you're gonna crash harder later on. I want to be wrong about this, and there's a lot we don't know about this specific program, and I would hope there would be a lot of emphasis on trying to fix the causes of the low T in the first place if possible, but maybe I'm just a wimp who hates needles. Who knows? But I'll try to follow up more as more information is released. But that's all we have time for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.